Week 2 is in the books, and we have more questions than answers after another wild week of NFL action. And to try and help you guys figure this all out, let's see if we can get some of the questions answered for you in regards to waivers. Of course, I am Chris Allen, fantasy analyst here at Matthew Berry's Fantasy Life. But of course, I can't be doing this by myself. I need help. I need the help from you guys in the chat today. And of course, I need help from our resident expert NFL professional, Nick Petit-Frere, starting offensive lineman for the Tennessee Titans, here to help us out. Nick, how you doing, man? After, like I said earlier, man, it's a wild week of action. We've got injuries, we've got personnel changes, we've got, everything that's, anything and everything that could have happened last week, we're seeing happening right now. How are you trying to digest all of this? And we're just 2 weeks into the season, man.
It's a lot. I would say that it's a lot different than last year. I felt like last year was a little bit more tame around the first 2 weeks. It was just more about waiver ads and everyone kind of knew where their teams were standing. But like this year, it just felt like yesterday we just got like so much information about so many injuries, so many differences with so many different teams, quarterback changes and things like that. It was a lot of news to take in. So it's nice that it happened yesterday and not like a day after waivers. So like there's a chance for people to make moves and do things so they can prepare their teams for week 3.
Exactly. And of course, everybody, we're welcoming everybody into the chat as of right now. And Nick, let's go ahead and let's take a step back and look at what we were talking about like last week. Like heading into week 2, we thought that it was going to be like Isaiah Likely was going to be the guy that everybody needed to grab. We at least noted and we talked a bit about like Marvin Harrison Jr. and like general concern. We weren't saying that, it was going to be a long-term thing or whatever. We weren't really buying all of the hype about him being like too slow to play at the NFL or anything along those lines. But of all the things that we discussed last week, what were kind of the big level takeaways like from last week that you think we can roll into week 3?
Well, like you said, like the Marvin Harrison getting reacclimated with Kyler Murray. They finally found a way to meet each other. That was something that Kyler Murray and Marvin were talking about, that they haven't had a lot of reps together. And now they think after a week of practice, they showed that they know who each other is. And Marvin Harrison had an amazing game. He had 4 great catches. And like we were talking about, there were long, deeper routes, bigger shot plays. And it was great to see that connection with Kyler Murray and Marv. And then also with Green Bay, the offense was sustainable. Obviously, Josh Jacobs had an amazing day with 35 carries, over 100 yards rushing. But Malik Willis was able to sustain the offense, actually provided some fantasy output to Jaden Reed and even a little bit to Romeo Doubs. So that offense is more stable than a lot of people assumed the week before, is that, it's going to be a train wreck. There's no chance that this operates. But Green Bay was able to find a way with Malik being better than he was the last 2 years to now being able to find a way for him to facilitate an offense and still provide fantasy value to all 3 of those guys.
I know for me personally, like we were both talking last week about Isaiah Likely and his ascension into like the tight end one, at least discussion. But this past week, I don't know if you watched like most of that game, Nick, or not, but just 50% of the routes like for Isaiah Likely, who was likely the number 1 ad, pun intended, for most folks over this past week. But with that drop off in production, we're seeing the Ravens offense, the offensive line in particular, not being where we expected it to be at. Do you have concerns about, the Ravens offense as a whole? Should we not have picked up Isaiah Likely? Kind of what did you see out of them and out of like Likely specifically that are you still hopeful, or do you have some concerns?
I'm still hopeful, but I think he probably came back a little bit to earth. Like he had an amazing game against the Chiefs on Thursday night to start off the NFL season for sure. And it just kind of seemed that he was more schemed up for more open opportunities since the Chiefs were double bracketing Mark Andrews a lot and things like that. But the Ravens are still playing a lot of double tight end formations. So Likely and Mark Andrews are in the field a lot at the same time. So they're both obviously like they're top 2 and 3 like pass catchers in this offense. I would say Mark Andrews is necessarily, although this last 2 games has not shown it, is that he's still probably the number 1 pass catcher, along with Zay Flowers being number 2 and Isaiah Likely number 3. And you can kind of be interchangeable along those 3. But I'm still bullish on Mark Andrews. I still think Isaiah Likely has a place in this offense and still provides value, especially since they run so much 2 tight end formations. So I wouldn't be too scared away just by the lack of production you saw from week 1 to week 2, because it was just an amazing game that he had from week 1. So you can have some tempered heads about him coming back to earth, but there's still an ability for him to still be a viable tight end for the rest of the season.
I 100% agree. And so, of course, that's the look back at week 2. But of course, now let's spin this into week 3. Let's look at what actually happened in week 2. Injuries all over the place, man. I feel like I need to put myself on injury reserve after seeing so many guys that we were expecting to put up so much fantasy production go down. We saw Cooper Kupp leaving in a walking boot, Isaiah Pacheco like out on crutches. But let's talk about the Rams specifically. I mean, both of those guys hurt. I mean, both Puka and Cooper Kupp hurt? I mean, is this a next man up type of thing for you? Or are you looking at a guy like Tyler Johnson? Are you looking at Demarcus Robinson if he's still available on waivers? I mean, are those kind of the guys that you're trying to target from a waiver wire standpoint for week 3? Or do you have enough concerns about the Rams offense that you're just trying to stay away?
I would probably stay away just in general. I mean, if you're desperate and you need a wide receiver or someone from that and someone that you could play in like a spot play in a super deep league, then like you said, guys like Tyler Johnson, Demarcus Robinson, actually a guy that I like a lot over the last few years is Tutu Atwell. That's been a provider for that offense as well. Those are a few of the guys that if you really need a spot play and you have nothing else on the waiver wires and you're like, let me just believe in the offense of Sean McVay and believe in Matthew Stafford. And I just think that that's what's going to provide the value. And then I think those would be 3 guys that you could add, but those aren't like guys that I'm pushing as like the top of my waiver wires or like using a lot of my FAAB budget for me to try to target, because I don't really think that's that valuable, especially with the optimism of Puka Nacua coming back healthy after his IR stint and Cooper Kupp coming back healthy as well.
So my question to you as an NFL player would be about like how the Rams are going to approach these next couple of weeks without having their 2 top stars like out from a passing game standpoint. I mean, no Kupp, we're assuming, especially no Puka. I mean, from your standpoint, would you expect them to start changing up their personnel? Sean McVay still likes to run a lot of 11 personnel. That would lend itself to Robinson, to Johnson, whether it's Tutu or whomever still being out there on the field. I mean, is it like, have you seen something like that happen before, or would you consider McVay kind of like shifting away from his the tendencies he typically likes to play, or is it going to be like a shift from that, like moving forward?
I think that's more situational and it's coach to coach. And my just like guessing opinion on Sean McVay, I think he's probably going to keep everything the same. I mean, he's done it last year when Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp, or when Puka Nacua was out and Cooper Kupp was not playing as well at high of a level as he was this last week in week 1 and in 2021. Like, they still had 11 personnel. It's not like the offense changed too much. It's just they're going to run the offense the way that they had the offense over the summer, over OTAs, and through fall camp. I wouldn't necessarily think of a major shift to anything. Maybe just more run with Kyren Williams. Maybe they do a little bit more runs with him. But I wouldn't necessarily think of a huge major shift to like, all right, we're just going to abandon our philosophies of 11 personnel and spraying the ball out and trying to create empty boxes so we have easier lanes to run and trying to create a lot of pre-snap motions, things like that. Like, if that's built in the offense and those are the core tenets of what it takes to build the offense and for them to make plays and get on script and be efficient, I wouldn't necessarily think that they would change. I just think that they need to find ways that find plays and find situations that suit the new wide receivers that are playing now.
Okay. I needed to hear that, because I've got Kyren Williams on a couple of rosters, and I think at this point he's the only safe player like in the Rams offense. So if you're telling me at least there might be some level of consistency, I can at least breathe easy for right now. But hopefully most of the Rams personnel, they continue to stay healthy throughout the rest of the season. Let's move to another injury type situation. We'll pull one of the questions from the chat in order to help tee that up. This is from Epic Fail. Which Chiefs RB would you prioritize, and how much FAAB? We lose Isaiah Pacheco, fractured fibula, I think was the original report. I know he's going in for more imaging to see like what the extent of the injury is going to be. But I mean, Nick, where would you be at, like, in terms of prioritizing the running backs that are currently for Kansas City? We've got Kareem Hunt coming in for the workout. We'll see if he winds up signing with them. But right now, all we've got is Samaje Perine and Carson Steele. So between those two, who you got?
I mean, that, like I said, it feels like more situational. That's the one good part about going into the later weeks of fantasy football, is that you kind of know where your team is And you could kind of feel like, okay, am I the type of guy that needs a running back right now that can provide stable floor? And I'm not really looking to have that big pickup that wins like a week or two out, because that's how I feel like it would be with Kareem Hunt, is that he's the type of guy that if I were to pick up now, I'm hoping for after a week or two, he becomes the every down guy until Pacheco gets back, and then it goes back to Pacheco, because Kareem Hunt has the ability to not to be a 3-down back. He showed it when he was in Cleveland, to be able to be a 3-down back, for him to be a great pass catcher outside in the backfield, but then also be able to run the ball hard and really be able to churn out runs. So I would say Kareem Hunt is the type of guy, if I feel confident about my team and I don't really need a spot play for this week or 2 weeks from now, because I have like enough depth for me to play 2 running backs or 3 running backs as one of them as I flex, then maybe you just pick a Kareem Hunt and just see what happens. But if I'm looking for the 4 play, I would say probably Carson Steele is probably going to be the early down back. And then Samaje Perine, if he catches up to more speed, is definitely going to become the pass catching back. And there's a possibility that he may take over Steele, with Steele being a younger guy.
Well, folks, I'm just going to have to go ahead and pull out. I didn't think I would have to do this as early as possible, but I will have to pull up my Bengals fandom here and just say that I'm still upset that Perine didn't wind up making it back to Cincinnati, because I was really hoping we could have that compliment to both Zach Moss and Chase Brown, like him being the solid pass protector that he was for Burrow throughout most of his stint there in Cincinnati. But Nick, I mean, seeing that, like, I can understand the pathway for a guy like Perine to get on the field, like in the situation that you described, and for Carson Steele kind of being the early down grinder. It almost seems like none of the guys are like none of the guys would be like the guy that we would target, unless you can get him for cheap. Is that kind of what I'm getting from what you're saying?
Yeah, like if you can get him for cheap, and then you just kind of got to look at like what games are coming up for the Chiefs. Like if you feel like most of the games for the Chiefs down the line while Pacheco's going to be hurt are more games where Chiefs are going to be controlling the ball more, they'll probably be up more in scores and they'll probably run the ball more, then Carson Steele may be the better play in this short-term mindset. But if you're thinking like, hey, the Chiefs, maybe for some reason the Chiefs are going to be down the next few weeks, or maybe they have a lot of tough opponents where it's going to be more of a shootout type of game, where maybe they actually get down a few games here and there, which probably doesn't happen that much because the Chiefs are an amazing team. They have a great defense. Obviously, their offense is one of the top offenses in the league. So that doesn't seem as likely, but that's where I would lean more towards Samaje Perine if I'm in like a full PPR league. And that's what I'm banking on. I'm banking on maybe he just has the pass catching role that hypes him up to where I can play him as a spot play, versus I'm in a half PPR or non-PPR league where Carson Steele is going to be the guy. And I'm hoping that Kareem Hunt in like 2 weeks or even 3 weeks at the latest, with 3 weeks with Kareem Hunt, becomes now the every down guy. And he gets way more, and he gets around like 60 to 65% of the workload, both run and pass, while the other guys are just kind of more of like a committee, like fill-in guy every now and then.
Understanding, folks, that we're trying to project what this offense is going to look like without Pacheco, but any running back that might be earning touches and being able to operate in a Patrick Mahomes-led offense is probably a good target to have. So welcome. This is going to be what we're doing every week, y'all. Between myself, Nick, we're answering questions, talking about like offensive situations, waiver wire targets each and every week. I mean, that is our job for you. And speaking of that, I mean, I was just talking about my Bengals, and I see another question over in the chat that kind of hints at this wide receiver rotation that the Bengals potentially have, assuming T. Higgins come back. This is from Bronx Bomber 904. Is Yoshi worth holding on to for trade value? Have him on raw, like with Neighbors, Thomas Jr., and Nico. So with those guys, I'm seeing Neighbors, Brian Thomas Jr., Nico Collins. He's got Andre Yoshivas. Like for my Bengals, I mean, Nick, looking at this, I mean, like, would you still continue to hold on to Andre?
I would, just for the sense of the wide receiver 2 position with the Cincinnati Bengals has always been a valuable position. Like, it was mainly going to be Jamar Chase and then T. Higgins, but there was times where when T. Higgins was out or Jamar Chase was out and Tyler Boyd stepped up into the wide receiver 2 role, and that still provided value. So there's always value in that wide receiver 2 role. We're still looking for updates on T. Higgins. We have no idea about his hamstring health, where he's at the moment. But if that's still the case and Yoshivas is still going to be the wide receiver 2, I would expect Yoshivas to still get a lot of run, but We also saw Mike Gesicki get a lot of run against the Chiefs this last Sunday. So at some point, some wide receiver two or some secondary pass catcher is going to be a focal point in this offense with the Bengals and Joe Burrow. The question is, who is it going to be? It's not a bad bet to take on Yoshi Voss as one of those guys, but Mike Gesicki could also be a guy. But I would imagine also Jamar Chase is probably getting a little squeaky wheel treatment. He probably wants the ball a little bit more. He hasn't had two great fantasy production weeks, but I could see week 3 or him coming out more and being more involved in the offense because he's a focal point of the offense, and that's what helps teams win games. You want to get the ball to your best playmakers' hands, and Jamar Chase is one of them.
I mean, come on, Nick. I mean, you don't have to let the people know. I mean, you're an insider. You're seeing Brian Callahan every day. You mean to tell me that, Callahan didn't let you know that, he was texting with T like on Sunday and let him know that he was going to be playing like this upcoming weekend against the Commanders? I mean, it's a safe space, man. You can let us, just tell me, man. You can let me know.
No, we're locked in. We're locked in with the Titans, and we play the Bengals later on. So we're locked in. It's all squared away now. Titans only.
Okay, Titans. Okay, I understand. All right. So I agree that the shift in personnel packages, like for the Bengals on Sunday, was actually somewhat eye-opening. Using more like 2 tight end sets, allowing Joe Burrow to actually like take some shots downfield. So with Jermaine Burton, like also in the field, you create explosives with multiple tight ends on the field. I thought that was kind of eye-opening because more of that traditional 11 personnel where it was Chase, Higgins, Boyd, traditionally. I mean, that's where we thought most of the value for a guy like Yoshi was going to be. But that's going to shift, and it's going to be still just like more 2 wide receivers. Okay, fine. But still, I think the way that Yoshi played, he showed enough that he is like working or becoming more of like a polished like wide receiver, especially if you wind up catching a couple of touchdowns. I would say that would definitely help for your amount of opportunity moving forward. But let's go ahead and grab another couple of questions like from the chat. This is from Mike G5781. I mean, he's in 2 different leagues, has Pittman and Terry, QJ and Whittington out there, but is QJ the get, or do I just pick up Perine or Jordan Love? Apparently, Jordan Love sitting out there on the waiver wire after his injury suffered in week 1. I don't know, Nick. Like, what do you think about this? I mean, I can understand the Quentin Johnston hype after him like catching a couple of touchdowns just this past week. I still have concerns about the Chargers passing game as a whole, and of course Jordan Whittington. We talked about the Rams passing game. So out of all those guys, I mean, Perine, Jordan Love, like QJ, I mean, where are you thinking at? Like considering like Pittman and Terry McLaurin, that's not the strongest wide receiver room to have.
Yeah, I'm still having faith, and although I was bullish on Terry earlier in the season, early on in the draft season, and I was bullish on him last week, and it hasn't really produced yet. I'm still holding faith because he's technically the wide receiver 1 for the Commanders, and I feel like Jaden Daniels is just going to get better week after week after week, and he's going to get better at passing and to be more confident throwing the ball downfield. But I understand having fears of not wanting to play Terry, and the same thing with Pittman. Is like Pittman is the number 1 target share guy with the Colts, but you just haven't really seen it be produced on the field. Like there's a league where I'm not able for me to play Pittman because although he's showing that he's the target share guy, it's just not enough for me to like play him and say like, hey, he's a viable guy for me to play right now. Because although you're getting the target share, it's just not enough for me to put you onto my roster. Mm-hmm. So I would say probably picking up QJ is a nice add there. I mean, if you really need a quarterback and Jordan Love is out there, it seems like the fact that the Packers weren't going to put him on IR shows some sort of optimism that, hey, we think that he's going to be back earlier than 4 games. Mm-hmm. So that shows some type of optimism that he could be earlier than expected and or the injury isn't as severe as people may have thought. So if you have the depth, if you feel confident, maybe you're 2-0, maybe you're able to add a Jordan Love and just have that as a back piece. And then you're able to have that maybe as trade leverage as if you see Jordan Love becoming a better quarterback over the next few weeks once he gets healthy, maybe you can move on from Kyler and get yourself another piece to supplement that wide receiver position.
My only concern for QJ specifically, like I get the fact that having a weak wide receiver room, like having Pittman and Terry, like that would kind of lean me more towards picking up a guy like Quentin Johnston. 6 targets this past week, like over 40% of the team's air yards. But they play the Steelers this upcoming week. Not the best matchup for Quentin Johnston, who we can assume is going to be going up against Joey Porter Jr. on the outside. So I would have some concerns about like picking him up. Whittington, that's more of a dart throw, and we already listed off some of our concerns from the Rams passing game as a whole without their top stars, like for the next like at least 2 to 3 weeks. So I can understand like throwing the dart at QJ, but if anything, Nick, to your point, if you can wind up stashing a guy like Jordan Love, who we think might be back sooner rather than later, that might be the stronger play than trying to lean on the volatility of the Chargers passing game, and then also going up against a tough matchup like in the Steelers. All right, so like what I've been saying, like this is what we're doing like every week, trying to get as many questions for you guys, answering as many questions as we can, while also trying to give at least some solid analysis regarding the waiver wire targets for the upcoming week 3 coming at you. I mean, I'm not going to say I can't believe it's already week 3, but it just feels like so much has happened like in these first couple of weeks between injuries, players not performing the way that we expected them to. I mean, we talked about Marvin Harrison Jr.'s like ascension between week 1 and week 2, Jamar Chase not really doing the things that we expect him to. A lot of those first round guys that we were expecting to have like production from, we're not seeing. Just feel like a lot has happened in just these first couple of weeks. I mean, Nick, do you feel the same way?
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, like there's a lot of guys that just haven't really came to the plate when you had in your first and second round drafts. But another position that a lot of people are feeling kind of left behind on is the tight end position. Like it's just felt like desolate for these last 2 weeks. Like none of the tight ends that we picked up in the first like 5 or 6 rounds that were like, because that was a big strategy that a lot of people had was if you don't get one of the top 5 tight ends, punt to position, don't worry about it because you aren't going to get that value in the first in the top 5 tight ends if you go like tight end 6 and 7 and 8, 9 and 10, which was like the Njokus, the Fergusons, the Evan Ingrams, which in a way we were kind of right, but a lot of that was due to injury or just maybe Ingram just not getting a lot of opportunities like he did last year. But most of these guys, like a Kincaid as well, like they're just not producing that level of disparity that you expect when you have one of the top position tight ends that you're thinking, all right, week in and week out, when I started Travis Kelce, a Laporta, McBride had a good week, but like when you're starting one of those guys, what you're expecting is if my opponent doesn't have a guy that's similar to that, I won the tight end position. Like I'm winning that with a 12-point versus like a 2-point advantage, and I'm already 10 points ahead. I can put that in my mind and say, okay, if I'm already 10 points ahead, I can probably have a little bit more floor on my other positions like wide receiver and running back with the expectation of I'm already beating this guy or this guy or girl, whoever at this one position, right? Mm-hmm. So I'm already having a lead in that way, so I can set up my team in a different way. But it just feels like every single tight end, it just hasn't produced to what we expected.
Speaking of tight ends that haven't produced, one of the questions in the chat might be able to help us at least discuss a bit more on that particular topic. This is from Dan B2387. If it helps, I'm thinking of offering up Ingram and Olave or Shaheed for Bowers or Andrews. Half PPR scoring redraft 12-team league. I don't know, man. I know you probably had a lot more on your mind Sunday morning, but when I get back and I'm looking at my phone, I see it like it was noon and kickoffs in an hour, and I'm seeing Evan Ingram is out from a hamstring injury. And I wanted to toss my phone and just walk away because it's just like, what am I supposed to do now? I've got no other. I think who did I wind up starting? I think I will actually take that back. I wound up starting Hunter Henry, so that wound up working out for me. But if you were in that position and now you have now he's essentially going to be week to week is the report that I heard earlier today. Any of the like trying to pick up Bowers or Andrews, do you think that's possible given what we at least hope to see out of Ingram moving forward and also the production of Olave or Shaheed? Do you think that's a potential trade or an avenue that Dan can take?
See, it's like a half and half. It's like I'm on the side of, okay, you're moving on from Evan Ingram and you're going to like a Bowers or an Andrew. I actually really like Bowers a lot. Even though I'm a Mark Andrews owner, I have Mark Andrews and Bowers in one of my leagues, and I'm starting Bowers over Mark Andrews just because they're feeding him. Like That's
Yeah.
one thing that a lot of people are afraid of with rookie tight ends, that like usually they don't really get fed the amount of targets or the amount of opportunities as like a wide receiver would that was like a first round pick, because that's just not normally how most offenses go. They usually try to feed more of the wide receivers and stuff like that. And it usually takes a tight end a year or two to kind of develop. But Bowers, similar to Laporta's trajectory, is already in there, is already being utilized a lot more. Similar to McBride, is that McBride was a slow grower, but over the season, around like week 6 or 7, when Zach Ertz kind of phased out a little bit more in the offense and it became more of the McBride show, he became more of the tight end one and became actually a very viable tight end play. So that's something that's looks like it's happening with Bowers, that Bowers might be a great play, but I'm very big on the Saints now with Clint Kubiak, and now his offense with a lot of more motions and more pre-snap motions and things like that. You guys saw it with how they played against the Cowboys and the week before against the Panthers. Granted, it's the Panthers, but still, like, you can see the offense working. You can see the schemes working, and like players like Olave and Shaheed are playing really well in that offensive scheme. And they seem like another one of these NFC teams that are really here to stay, that are trying to make a playoff push, that look like, hey, they're going to be more than just another team in the conference. They're a team that's going to be competing for one of the top spots in the playoffs and things like that, and they're going to be a competitive team. So it's kind of that feel of, do you feel like you can get rid of an Olave and a Shaheed with, I think they're not at their ceiling yet. I think they're just getting better and better. Or do you feel like you really need that value with Brock Bowers or Mark Andrews and trying to go ahead and trade off for them?
I think without more context to both rosters, that might be that's my biggest question right now. Seeing like, are you offering something that the other person needs? Because like, say if they were the manager that just lost Cooper Kupp, then offering a Rashid Shaheed, at least for the short term portion, that might be appealing to them. And then you getting back a guy like Brock Bowers or Mark Andrews, and I'm 100% with you, Nick, in terms of Bowers and like my appeal to him, like from a fantasy standpoint, like 25% of the targets. I mean, a high route rate, high targets per route run, and also being efficient on those. Like, I can already see him like moving into that top 5 ranking, like for tight ends for the rest of the season, because it's not like any of the other guys that we drafted at top 5 are really doing much, like outside of a Trey McBride and maybe a couple other guys. But I mean, because if you got Dalton Kincaid, if you got Travis Kelce, probably panicking at this point. So I can understand like trying to grab a guy like Brock Bowers like for the remainder of the season. So I'm kind of with that, like trying to move for them, but again, without knowing the context of the other person's roster and their roster. I'm somewhat hesitant, but I understand the move. Let's keep things going. We'll answer a couple more questions from the chat. We've got topics that we want to talk about. We want to know what you guys want to talk about. We got to know what burning questions y'all have from a waiver wire standpoint, or even just generally what you guys are thinking about for making moves for your fantasy rosters for the rest of the season. But speaking of that, Blake Friedman, yo guys, what's up, Blake? Hurting at wide receiver with Kupp and AJ Brown down, thinking of trading away Ramondre Stevenson for Tank Dell. He's got Ken Walker and Sharp as RB1, Zach Moss as RB2. This is a half-point PPR 3 wide receiver league. I don't know. Kupp and AJ Brown down, grabbing Tank Dell. I think this is a solid buy low spot. That's my just knee-jerk reaction. But what are you thinking, Nick?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the Houston Texans are a great offense to target. In terms of wide receivers, and just in terms of CJ Stroud, like being a great quarterback. And a lot of people were afraid coming into the year that, okay, there's a lot of mouths to feed in that offense with Tank Dell, Stephon Diggs, Nico Collins. Like, and then Joe Mixon coming in, are they really going to be able to facilitate the offense to where a lot of people are still able to be fed? And it looks like at the time being, yes. Like Nico Collins obviously had an amazing game, but Tank Dell is actually probably the best value in terms of that entire offense, just in terms of where you got him later in the drafts, and him still being able to be a wide receiver that you're able to play in like a 3 wide receiver league or even a 2 wide receiver league as probably a flex play. That's not that bad.
Yeah, and my concern going into this, so their Sunday night game against the Bears was that because Tank Dell is like smaller in stature, like I understand, but he's still been able to play well as an outside receiver. He would be going up against like whether it's Jalen Johnson, Tyreek Stevenson, like one of the Bears like perimeter corners, and that would present like a tougher matchup for a guy like Tank Dell. So I could see why Steph Diggs wound up continuing to have like the productive game or the productive season that he's had so far, and where Dell might struggle against those outside corners, where we saw Nico Collins like being the grown ass man that he is. And but moving forward, I mean, who do the Texans have? They've got Minnesota in week 3, Jacksonville in week 4, and then Steph Diggs gets to play his old team in the Buffalo Bills in week 5. But for Tank Dell specifically, those are all matchups where I can see him winning. And Tank Dell, like, he almost went off for one. If I think he either stumbled or Stroud like was maybe a little bit high on a pass that would have created an explosive for Dell on Sunday night. But regardless, I agree. Targeting like one of the lower end values like on the Texans passing game as of right now would be a strong move for you. And since Ramondre Stevenson has played so well, you're probably offering the other person something they could probably use at this point. They could probably use some running back production. Now, I might ask for a little bit more in return, but still, I think using Stevenson as a piece to move as of right now to get more wide receiver help, since that's something you need, I'm definitely with it. Totally understand that. All right. So we were talking a bit ago about running back rooms that we might have at least some sort of concern with. And there's another situation like brewing, well, that's pretty much like, I guess, brewed over at this point down in Carolina that I want to talk about. Bryce Young out, Andy Dalton in, but should we like, how are you approaching like the rest of this, like the Carolina Panthers, like offense, like as a whole? Let's see if we can try and sort this out. I mean, first off, let's just start with Andy Dalton. Do we have some hope for a guy like Deontay Johnson? I don't even want to get into the Adam Thielen portion of it, but let's just talk about the primary pass catcher in Deontay Johnson. Like, given the switch to Dalton as veteran quarterback, like, do you think that we can still get some fantasy value out of Deontay Johnson?
I think we do. I think we can. And the only way that you can really talk about it is from the last game that we saw Andy Dalton with last year. And he had, I think it was around like 360 yards passing, I think 2 touchdowns against the Seahawks last year. So Andy Dalton is still a viable quarterback. I wouldn't necessarily put him as like a quarterback that I'm starting in like a super flex league. I mean, if you need to, obviously if you had Bryce Young as like your third option as your quarterback in a super flex league or something like that, yeah, we're picking up Andy Dalton and we're going to do that. But and just in terms of being able to provide to pass catchers, I think Andy Dalton is the type of quarterback that's going to be able to get the ball on to Deontay Johnson. But look, I know you don't want to talk about Adam Thielen, but I want to talk about Adam Thielen.
Okay.
Thielen had a great season last year. While he, in my opinion, over the first like half of the year, like Adam Thielen was like one of the top, like was a top 10 wide receiver.
Yes.
For a good amount of the season last year. Now, granted, it kind of fell off later on in the year, but he showed the ability for him to still create separation, even though he's an older wide receiver, and still be able to make great plays. So if you're looking at if you're looking at it as like a deep league, like added wide receiver, it wouldn't hurt to take a flyer on Adam Thielen just to see. Maybe he has one more year in him. If he doesn't, you took a late flyer on him. You used probably one of your last bench spots. Maybe you have, with all these injuries now, you probably put a guy in IR and you're just waiting to see what happens. I'm not saying he's my top waiver wire ad, but if you're really struggling at wide receiver and you feel like you had nothing that happened, he'll probably be left over after waivers on today. Like after waivers hit tomorrow morning, he'll probably be left over. You'll probably be able to pick him up around like 9, 10 o'clock in the morning. Be like, all right, fine. Nothing happened for me. I didn't get anything. I'm going to take a flyer on Thielen and see what happens.
Oh, that's a good point, because you would have to expect that some people are uncertain about what Dalton can really bring to this passing offense, like for the Panthers. And then now if we really can't expect a ton out of Dalton, or at least that's the assumption going in, then of course that leads itself to, well, I don't even want to mess with like Adam Thielen at this point. So you can probably pick him up for free tomorrow after waivers run, or whatever the day is that waivers run, and pick him up shortly thereafter. That's definitely a good strategy tip to kind of hold and see where things happen, because Thielen was capable of earning like a high-end amount of targets like just this past season. And if the passing game does start to function at least as intended under Dave Canales, then hey, we might see the work that we want go to Deontay Johnson. But then, of course, Adam Thielen becomes a beneficiary like thereafter. And looking at the Panthers like schedule moving forward, I mean, not that bad. They get the Raiders this week, my Bengals in week 4. and then the Chicago Bears in week 5. So kind of a tough out, like over the next like 2-3 weeks. I see Washington in there in like week 7. So it's entirely possible that as long as Andy Dalton is starting over the next like 4 or 5 weeks, we could get some good production out of the receivers, or at least the one receiver that we drafted so highly. All right, so we've got about maybe another 15-ish minutes or so to kind of answer some more questions, go over some topics that we saw coming out of week 3. But of course, we appreciate you guys checking us out. We'll be doing this every Tuesday afternoon. Myself, Chris Allen, and also Nick Petit-Frere, starting offensive lineman for the Tennessee Titans. I mean, this has been such an excellent experience to be able to like talk through some of the stuff with somebody that's like actually playing the game. I mean, that's the thing that I trip out over all the time, because I look at all this stuff from a data perspective, try and watch as many games as I can. But of course, I've got you, Nick, in order to tell me whether or not I'm just staring at numbers like too much, and you can give me the actual context that I need in order to bring all this stuff home. But let's see, we grab a couple more questions like from the chat. I'll say this is from Brian Moore. This one might hit a little close to home for you, Nick. Tyjae Spears injured. Tony Pollard has been playing well. Is there anything to picking up the other, like the RB3, like for the Tennessee Titans? What are your thoughts, man?
I mean, there's always value in picking up like a backup running back and things like that whenever someone else is injured. But I mean, obviously, like looking at how Tony Pollard's played, like Tony's been great. I mean, like it's been awesome to have him on the team. It's been awesome to see him run. He's a strong runner, great pass catcher out in the backfield as well. Great pass protector as well. So Tony Pollard is a great play. So yeah, picking up Chestnut is a value, just because you always got to be careful. NFL is 100% injury league, so that's the one bad part about playing NFL. But that's the risk that we take. So obviously there's value there, but in reality, what I'm thinking of is there's probably a lot more run with Tony Pollard now. Instead of it being a split backfield, because Tyjae and Tony were amazing during a fall camp and during OTAs. It's probably more leaning on Tony now, just as an older guy, as a veteran guy. But there still is value to be had in terms of picking up the backup, which would be Chestnut.
So I wanted to ask you a bit more about like Tony and his, like, I guess, resurgence from a fantasy standpoint. I mean, throughout most of the offseason, did you really see a lot of this coming? Because a lot of the, like myself included, the concern from him, like when he exited Dallas, was that, okay, I get the injury, like he had the injury like coming out of the 2022 season, 2023 it wound up hampering him, and now he gets shipped off to Tennessee. Not to say that's a bad thing, but it's like, all right, well, now is he like at the point where can he really recapture some of the explosiveness that he had, like when we were like rostering him and we were starting him in DFS, like when Ezekiel was down in like 2021, 2022? I mean, did you see most of that throughout camp? Or was this like something that was kind of a surprise to you, like once the rubber met the road in week 1?
I mean, no, I saw it all throughout camp, which is what it was amazing just to see that. And that's the one like cool part about being an NFL player, is that sometimes you see things that other people don't. Like that was something that we heard a lot as a Titans, that like a lot of people had a lot of doubts on us just in general, because they're like, we just don't have the type of players. We don't have players that are good enough to play these positions, from the running back, wide receivers. And then we go out and we get Tony Pollard. We go out, we get Calvin Ridley. We already have D-Hop. We had Traylon Burks. We have guys all around the team. And I will say this, that we have a chip on our shoulder. So I think that's something that kind of built over spring and into fall camp. And that's something that we still have to this day, So for me, I was kind of happy that a lot of people were doubting the Titans, because I felt like Tony Pollard was going to be a great play. I felt like Tyjae was going to be a great play. So in case you're wondering, yes, I have a lot of Tony Pollard. I have a lot of Tyjae on my teams. So I'm totally like, I saw it because I was there, but I was very bullish on those two, because I was like, yeah, this is going to work.
Man, where were you? Like, I'm just saying, where were you like on social media, like kind of letting me know, or like even putting, letting even just the fantasy life community know, hey, we should be drafting Tony Pollard. Where were you at like about a month ago, man? I'm just saying, like, you could have let me. All right, man. I understand.
There was value. There was value for me. That was my draft. So I was like, I'm not going to look, if I can get them where I can get them right now, I'm not going to say a word.
You had the insider info. You had the insider. Yeah. You had the intel. I understand that. I totally understand that. All right. Couple more questions, and then we'll get on out of here in about like 10 minutes. But before we like hop into the questions, I did want to ask about like we got a couple more injury situations that we did want to try and discuss before we get on out of here. This one not as severe. This one might be like fairly clean cut. Joe Mixon, Houston Texans. Gets rolled up with one of the, what to me looked like, and I don't know if you saw the replay, Nick, it looked like one of the classic hip drop tackles that the NFL was trying to get rid of. Goes out for a little bit, does wind up finishing the game, but in his stead, while he was out, Cam Akers actually looked like fairly decent, like running behind the Texans offensive line. Akers seems like more on the low end, just given, he's bounced around a little bit around the league. Looks like Joe Mixon will be available for week 3, but is he one of those guys that if you have the bench space, are you trying to add at this point?
Yeah, it wouldn't hurt. I mean, it's always good to have a handcuff. If you have extra bench space, that's always about constructing your roster the best that you can. You have to know where you are on a week-to-week basis and say, okay, and you have to plan for the future. And you have to tell yourself, okay, if for some reason my best running back gets hurt, what would be my pivot? What would I be able to do? Or if you feel comfortable with where you're at entering your roster construction is, okay, what can I do to be a step ahead of somebody else? And one of those steps would have been like, hey, maybe some people dropped guys like Braylon Allen after week 1, or people dropped players like Chase Brown and things like that, or maybe no one picked up Cam Akers. And it's just the thought process of, if I have a Joe Mixon, do I have the bench space for me to have his backup just in case? If I had a Christian McCaffrey, obviously it was a great idea to pick up a guy like Jordan Mason or even Isaac Guerrero just in the off chance, especially a Jordan Mason now. Like I literally have Christian McCaffrey, Jordan Mason, and Isaac Guerrero. And people are looking at me like I'm crazy, but I'm just in the thought process of, okay, if Christian went down and like they're giving Jordan all this work, the odds of Jordan going down, I mean, he has a lot of work going on. I mean, I'm just protecting myself, and I'm putting myself with offenses that I believe in. An offense that a lot of people believe in are the Houston Texans, the 49ers, and offenses like that. So you always want to protect yourself when you have a player like that with their backups more often than not, if you're able to. But if you're one of these managers that don't have that top tier running back on that team, having the backup is always a great option, because you become the leverage piece if for some reason something were to happen and now you're the guy that's holding the bag with a Jordan Mason or a Cam Akers and things like that.
Definitely. And I think one of the things that I've tried to do in the past is like, while if I'm not always trying to hold my own like handcuff, the guy with contingent value, if should my starter go down. So like if I have Bijan Robinson, like I'll have Tyler Algier, I'll go out and get somebody else's backup. Right. So if somebody drafted Ezekiel Elliott, I've got Rico Dowdle. If somebody drafted Aaron Jones, I'm holding Ty Chandler, because now not only do I have like a backup that might vault into the RB2 conversation should their RB1 go down, if I don't need them, and also like wind up lucking myself into like that type of situation, I've got trade bait if I don't wind up needing them. So like if I don't have to start them, I can wind up trading them to like the person that has the RB1 that went down, and actually use that as trade value like later on in the season. So just kind of depends, either drafting your own or even just like identifying backups, whether it's Zach Charbonnet for this past week or whomever. I mean, always a good strategy to try and make sure that you're investing in offenses that you believe in, Nick, to your point. But another situation to discuss real quick, and this also answers this question from Ryan Spencer with just a few minutes left to go. What FAAB are we sending in order to pick up Hunter Henry? And I know that's a player that you wanted to talk about, because I mean, Jacoby Brissett, Hunter Henry seemed like they had the connection in week 2. I mean, solid game, 100 plus yards for Hunter Henry. I mean, are you trying to target him on the waiver wire? And if so, how much?
You probably are, just in terms of the sense of like the tight end like land just being so desolate, So like the chances are that like you're probably going to spend up for a guy like Hunter Henry, where it feels awkward saying that, just because it's not like a sexy pick. It's not like a person that you're like thinking like, all right, this is the guy I'm playing, like an Isaiah Likely. When people spent a good amount of FAAB on Isaiah Likely, a lot of people saw the, oh my God, this guy's so athletic,
right?
Skinny tight end, but we know he's doing a lot of routes. He's actually a good blocker as well. So he's going to be on the field a lot more than people think. It looks good. I mean, it's one of those FAAB spends that when you do it and you're like, you feel comfortable about it, because you're like, okay, like I feel confident about the Ravens. I feel confident about Isaiah Likely. I feel confident about the analysis by a lot of these reporters and stuff like that. With Hunter Henry, it's just kind of more of like, I'm banking on the Patriots. Kinda okay. I'm banking on Jacoby Brissett.
Yeah,
kinda like it's you don't feel as like good, but I mean you're probably spending up. I mean, it seems crazy to say that you're spending like 40 to 50%. I mean, if you're really that desperate at tight end, but like I would say to be safe would probably be 40% of your FAAB budget. I mean, if you get him, you get him. That's cool. But there's a good possibility that he just doesn't pan out. Maybe it was a 1 week kind of like flash in the pan that happened last year. He had like a few like flashes in the pan, and then he wasn't like a tight end. Like I think he finished out like tight end like 14 or something like that, just because of the amount of touchdowns that he had. Like it wasn't necessarily like he had a bunch of yards and a bunch of catches. It was just like he had like 2 or 3 weeks where he had like 2 or 3 touchdowns, and it was just like, all right, like that's enough to become like a top 12 tight end in fantasy, just having like 4, 5, 6 touchdowns over the year.
And I'll add some input, but I think this other question from Mark Folkman helps kind of just draw the distinction, or like find out what the value of Hunter Henry is moving forward. Because Mark asked, would you even drop Dallas Goedert for Hunter Henry in half PPR? So like, I kind of see the case for it. I mean, in the sense that, Goddard last night without A.J. Brown there, wasn't involved in the passing game as we really hoped he would be, or see more opportunity. Devonta Smith was really the guy that was involved. Covey was the other guy that was involved like quite a bit as well. And of course, Saquon Barkley, like catching a couple of targets here and there. Not the one target that he really needed to that would have helped the Eagles win the game, but that's neither here nor there. Sorry, Eagles fans. But if looking at the way Hunter Henry played or has played over the past couple of weeks and seeing Goddard's output, I kind of understand like valuing him like fairly close, but is it too soon to really like, give Dallas Goedert the old heave-ho out onto the waivers?
It kind of feels like that, just because you're going from like the Philadelphia Eagles offense to like the Patriots. It's
That's
just
right.
such a drastic jump to do, but it's something that I would understand. It's not a crazy thing to like say at this point, especially with just how the tight end position is. It's just, how much value do you really feel if you're going from Dallas Goedert to Hunter Henry are you going to have later on in the year? Like, do you really feel like this Hunter Henry thing is something that's going to be mainstay? And that's something that I can't even necessarily say, So that's tough for me to say something like that. I feel way more confident about saying something like that for Isaiah Likely, even Mike Gesicki, just because I know in my head, like, okay, I know the Bengals offense. They use it. Sometimes they start a little bit slow in the beginning of the year, but I have faith in a Joe Burrow. I have faith in the pass catchers that they have there. I have faith in that offense, right? Same thing with the Ravens. I have faith in Lamar Jackson. I have faith in that offense. I have faith in the talent of Isaiah Likely. It's just a different conversation with both Goddard and Hunter Henry. The main thing you can really say about Goddard is he's with the Eagles. I have faith in the Eagles offense. I have faith in Jalen Hurts.
I think that's where I'm at as well, because you were talking earlier about investing in offenses that you believe in. Do I believe in the Patriots offense? Not yet, even though they beat Cincinnati week 1. I get it. But do I have faith in the Eagles offense more so than them? I would say yes, as of right now. But Mark, to your point, I understand the question, just given the way that both of those players and their offenses in general like have been performing. So totally understand that. All right. One rapid fire question before we get out. We've got 1 minute left before we roll out for the start of week 3. Nick, streaming quarterbacks. Give me a guy that you would think that if you needed a quarterback for this week, who would you want to pick up off the waiver wire? Is it Geno? Is it Baker Mayfield? Is it Derek Carr? Out of any of the guys you can think of that are probably going to be out there on the waiver wire, which quarterback would you really want to target from a streaming standpoint?
If it's one and I'm going for floor, I'm probably going Geno. Like I said from last week, I feel like Geno is probably one of the most consistent quarterbacks, especially with the new offense that they have now. And like you just got to think about it. They have 3 amazing pass catchers with DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, and now JSN becoming what a lot of people were expecting him to be last year, right? One of that, probably now the wide receiver 2 in this Seattle Seahawks offense, but possibly maybe the target catcher, probably like the main target option, just in terms of how DK Metcalf plays, is probably more of a big boom or bust type of guy. But JSN seems more of like a consistent. He's going to get the ball at least 8 targets a game, most likely, more often than not. So like you're going to have more of a consistency with JSN if this continues. That would be my floor play. But the Saints have been amazing these last 2 weeks. It's kind of hard for you to like go ahead and say, okay, I don't believe in Derek Carr after seeing what they did. Won to the Panthers, get it. But then the Cowboys at Dallas, like it's tough for you not to like bank on the Saints at this point.
Yeah, and I think that's where I'm at. If you want ceiling and you're trying to just, if you're like 0-2 and want to completely mix stuff up and try and say, like, I'm going to get a win this week, and you want to try and add that punch at quarterback, I think Derek Carr allows that. I mean, explosive passing, the way that Clint Kubiak has really transformed that offense with, I mean, top end of the league in terms of like pre-snap motion, play action rate, like design rollouts for Derek Carr to hit those like two-man wide receiver route concepts with Rashid Shaheed, Chris Olave like streaking down the field, and of course Alvin Kamara playing very well in that outside or primarily outside zone concept blocking scheme that they have for the Saints. I dig that. Floor, Geno. You want ceiling? Go Derek Carr. All right, folks. That's all we got for the start of week 3. Appreciate everybody checking out all the questions we have here, asking questions, like putting all the comments that you have in there. Appreciate all the love. If you want to see us, come back in. Stop back in next week. We'll be back here about 1 o'clock Eastern every Tuesday answering your questions. But for Nick, for our producer, Lamarca, producer Paul, I'm Chris Allen. Appreciate everybody checking us out.